All right, let's do this. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time out of your day to join myself, Raul, and Craig for this capacity building workshop. So I'm going to go ahead and get our presentation pulled up. Our time today will be, we have it set out to go from now until about 2:15 p.m. for some Q&A. So we'll be delivering this presentation for you all. And along with that, like Craig said, if you have any questions or anything like that throughout the presentation, you're welcome to put them in the chat. We've set aside time for Q&A at the end of the presentation, that way to make sure that we cover all of our information ahead of time. But today's capacity building workshop is about how to initiate policy advocacy at the state and local levels. So first and foremost, let me go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Maxwell Johnson. I'm the Assistant Program Manager for the Binge and Underage Drinking Initiative at the Institute for Public Strategies. I'll turn to Raul if Raul wants to introduce himself.
Hi, thank you very much. I appreciate this. My name is Raul Verdugo, Advocacy Manager for Alcohol Justice and Program Manager for the Los Angeles Drug and Alcohol Policy Alliance. And I want to thank both Matthew and Craig for having me here today this afternoon. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Very excited to have Raul with us today. So this is kind of what we're going to be looking to cover in the presentation. I'm going to go over the California state legislative process a little bit and then talk about a few tools for advocacy that prevention providers and as individuals you can all take advantage of and have access to. Then we're always going to talk a little bit about the California Alcohol Policy Alliance itself. And then him and I are both going to kind of tag team and chat about the benefits of the partnerships between state alliances and state advocacy groups and more local coalitions and things like that. And then at the end, like I said, we'll have some time for question and answer. So without further ado, let me go ahead and begin. What I want to start with though first is a pretty important definition that comes up a lot when we're talking about advocacy and engagement. And it's understanding the difference between lobbying and advocacy. As nonprofits, sometimes there are limitations in terms of what we can do and how we can interact in terms of advocacy. And so it's important to understand these definitions and also know what your organization is capable of and what is within your parameters or what your general mission is when it comes to civic engagement. So and these definitions come from the Council of Nonprofits.org. So they provided definitions specific to nonprofits and kind of what their engagement strategies look like. So advocacy, as defined by the Council of Nonprofits.org, is any action that speaks in favor of, recommends, argues for a cause, supports or defends, or pleads on behalf of others. While lobbying is communicating with key decision makers about existing or potential legislation and urging a vote for or against. And I think that the biggest thing that's important to address when we're looking at lobbying and advocacy is the idea that lobbying is asking for a specific action, a specific yes or no vote to be taken on a specific piece of legislation in your legislature. Whereas advocacy is much more focused on the issue as a whole and really kind of advocating for best practices or potential solutions to addressing this issue at a system-wide level. So a variety of different solutions that can be offered, trying to address a general issue, not always specifically a particular piece of legislation. So that's just a key definition I wanted to set our tone off with. So first off, the California State Legislature. So what I'm going to do in this portion of the presentation is kind of go through the different opportunities for engagement when it comes to our state legislative system, and kind of walk you, I don't know, and this might bring you back to Schoolhouse Rock, talking about, what is, how the bill moves through, but now I'm going to apply that to our state legislative system. So I'm going to talk about submitting an idea for a bill, the policy and fiscal committee aspects of a bill, the amendment process, what happens when a bill hits the governor's desk, and what happens when a bill becomes law and how you can still stay engaged in that implementation process, because enforcement is another very key component when it comes to our legislative system. So first off, let's start with submitting an idea for a bill. So what I think is really powerful and unique about our legislative process is that an idea for a bill can come from anywhere. If you have an idea for wanting to address a lack of infrastructure or public transportation in your community, if you see a recurring issue as it comes to depositing waste or a lack of sustainable and renewable energy resources, and you have an idea of how to increase those in your community, anyone, any individual or any group can have the ability to present a bill to a representative. Now, some legislators have systems in place to receive proposals for new laws. So if you're looking and have an idea for a bill and you want to share it with a representative, or essentially try and get a representative to sponsor that bill, it's really key to kind of pick what representative you think would be a good champion for this bill. Does your bill align with their values? Does it align with their policy goals and objectives? Do you think, have they had experience, moving and successfully having bills similar to your issue area passed in the previous legislative sessions? Really taking the time to do your research on who you think would be some key potential sponsors for your bill. So once you've gathered up your proposal and you've spoken with a representative and they've agreed to sign on to your bill, the bill language then goes to the Legislative Council's office, where it is reviewed and revised. So a bill enters the legislative process when a legislator agrees to sponsor that bill. It's like, you know what, I'm going to take this on. I'm going to, draft up the mock language, really communicate the idea as well, and then they send it to the Legislative Council's office, where they really kind of turn it into that beautiful, super easy to digest, very exciting, riveting read of the legislation that we are so fond of and look to be reviewing. You can sense the sarcasm in my voice because, as we know, a lot of times these legislative bills are very complex or confusing in the way that they're written, but this is the current process and how it operates. So once the bill has reached that Legislative Council's office and it's reviewed and sent back to the representative, and they go back and forth, it is then a final draft is then sent to the author's house of origin. So if the bill is from a senator or an assembly member, it is then sent to the Senate or Assembly desk, where it will be read for the first time and assigned a number. So that's how a bill really kind of becomes a part of the legislative cycle and system. So even from and I think this is really important for people to know, because I think that oftentimes people think that you need to have a very heavy experience in law or have a really strong understanding of the public policy system. But in all reality, people want constituents. They want people living in their communities to be the ones presenting these ideas for bills, because that really kind of shows them and reflects to the representative what current issues their constituents are really passionate and caring about. So from the very beginning of this legislative process, you have the opportunity to be involved and determine what bills potentially are going to be moving through the legislature that session. So now I want to talk about the policy committee side. So once a bill is read in the House of Origin, it is then sent to the Rules Committee. Now, the Rules Committee is pretty much like the buffer zone for determining of where the bill is going to be sent to, because the bill is always sent to a policy committee first. So depending on the subject matter contained in that bill, that is going to determine what policy committee the Rules Committee sends the bill to. A very common one that I've seen a lot just in my experience of monitoring state legislation is the Governmental Organization Committee. It's kind of I kind of see it as a catch-all for bills that might not have a super specific or niche kind of subject matter. It is the GO committee is a very common one I see a lot of bills travel to first. What's really beneficial about this policy committee process, and I think that we can attest to the fact that sometimes it feels like bills move slowly, or that action and change can kind of move slowly through our legislature. But I think it provides a really positive opportunity for prevention providers and advocates to engage with the bill early on, because bills are not heard in policy committees until 30 days after they've been introduced and printed. Now, there are certain exceptions to those rules, and if you want to get more into that nitty-gritty stuff, we can, that can be part of our Q&A later on. But typically, a bill has about 30 days in between its assignment and the first time it's heard in the policy committee. And this offers an opportunity for advocates to be able to research the bill, develop arguments, begin taking advantage of the tools for advocacy that we'll be talking about later, and engaging and sharing their perspectives on the bill with their legislators and their representatives. So honestly, this buffer time is really is a great opportunity for our prevention providers to be able to engage and do their proper due diligence on the bills coming through the legislature. So now, once a bill goes through the policy committee, if a bill has a fiscal impact or state cost, they are heard in the Senate or Assembly Appropriations Committee. When a bill goes from a policy committee to a fiscal committee, the argument for or against that bill changes. Now the focus is not so much on the implementation or the overall impact of the bill from a public policy standpoint. Now we're really focusing on the cost. What's it going to cost? The accuracy of the fiscal assessment that's been provided. What barriers are there to funding this mandate? Are there things in these assessments that weren't accounted for? So if you're interested in providing an insights into a bill's potential state costs, right? Because money talks, and there's a finite amount of it, especially when we're talking about the California budget. You really do want to be able to make a strong argument for why you feel a certain bill is or is not a good way to be spending our state government's money and our funding and our reserves and things like that. So when a bill transfers into a fiscal committee, again, if it not every bill goes to a fiscal committee, but if in some way it's going to fiscally impact the state or require state costs or funded and mandated programs, then it will head to the appropriations committee. That is a really key opportunity to be able to develop a strong financial argument for or against the bill as you're monitoring and tracking it. So that's where the fiscal committee becomes really key and available. And you have the opportunity to see what the staff analysis and what the representative analysis of a bill was when it was in a policy committee and kind of what their takes on it were as it transfers into a fiscal committee. This is available on the California Legislative Information website, and I'll be referencing that website a lot. And if I don't throughout the presentation, I will at the end show you how to find and navigate this website. But a lot of times the analysis for these policy committees is available on that location and that website. So you can kind of do your research in that sense and see kind of what the perspective of the bill's financial impact is from the representative standpoint. So after the fiscal committee, there's something finally after the fiscal committee, if it goes into the fiscal committee or after the policy committee process, a bill can be amended at any number of stages, honestly, as it goes through the floor. This image right here is the life cycle of legislation in California. This is from the California State Assembly's website. And the whole legislative process I'm talking to you about these are all tips and things coming from the California State Senate's website. So that you can understand the progress and the way that which bills are moving through the legislature, and I'm getting it directly from the source. But essentially, amendments can happen at any time. They can happen in committee sessions or on the House floor. They're presented to the author, who either checks off on them or can kind of help determine the next action of the bill and where it will move forward. If they want to put it on pause for a little bit, they can move it to an inactive file. There's a whole number of things that happen. I'm skipping a lot of the particulars that can happen for a bill, but just know that the amendment process is really important because it can happen in policy committees, it can happen on the floor, and then after each amendment, it is reapproved, it's approved by the committee, it's read on the floor for another time, and finally, when a bill is at its last stage, before it passes through the House of Origin, it enters the third reading, and the third reading is essentially like, okay, we're voting on this bill now to see if we're going to pass it through our House. What do we think? Is there any, essentially, speak now or forever hold your peace. And you get to kind of see where this bill is going to travel to next. Because once it passes through the first House or its House of Origin, it's going to go to the Senate or the Assembly, wherever, whatever the opposing House was, and goes through this process all over again. So the third reading is a really key reading and a really key aspect of the legislative process. And so that's why it's really important to monitor amendments as they occur throughout the process before it gets to the third reading. And so you can do this a couple of different ways in terms of monitoring and following amendments. You're able to subscribe to bills through the California Legislative Information website. So I'll show this later on once we've kind of concluded the content in the presentation. But essentially you sign up on the website, you put your email in, you pick a bill, and you can select what notifications you want to receive from the bill. Once you hit track or connect and stuff, as that bill travels through the legislature, you will get updates on its location. You'll get updates on when it hits the daily file. So before a bill is discussed in a committee, it is put on the daily file 4 days before it's discussed. So you can prepare for that and, and be able to kind of see what the analysis or what was discussed about the bill in the committee. So the tracking, the free tracking information and opportunities provided at the state level are effective. They're not perfect, but they're a great way to get started if you're brand new into monitoring legislation, things like that. Also, if you want to get updates, you can contact the author's district office, or you can contact your own legislator's district office and see, kind of what if they've been monitoring the bill, if you've been in conversations with them, what they're seeing and what they're noticing about the piece of legislation. So the third reading is a very key part of the legislative process. Now, following the third reading, it goes to the other house. Let's say it passes through the other house. If there's any amendments made in the house that is not the house of origin, essentially a joint committee is created between the Senate and the Assembly. They discuss, they concur about whether the amendments are approved, and if both houses agree. And so let's say all that goes swimmingly and the bill has now passed through both houses of our legislature, the Senate and the Assembly. Now it's headed to the governor's desk. So this essentially is your last chance to provide your input on a piece of legislation before it is signed into law or vetoed. Once the bill is sent to the governor's desk, the governor has 12 days to sign the bill. He can sign the bill, approve it without signing. So if he approves it without signing, essentially it's like dishing it off to the Secretary of State, and they chapter the bill, or they can veto the bill. So the last chance to provide input on a bill before it becomes law or vetoed happens within these 12 days. It's appropriate to call the governor's office or send them a letter if that's a way that you want to be able to engage with the representative. That's the governor's office phone number. That's straight from their website. And then they also have their contact information on there as well. So you can go on and click and email them throughout that process. So this is like the last step of the legislative process before a bill is signed into law or vetoed. So let's say a bill is then signed into law. Once the bill is signed into law, there is still an opportunity for you to be a key component in the implementation process of that legislation. Like I said earlier, having a bill signed into law is like the first fight, the first battle, really. The second part is the enforcement side of things. How is it going to be enforced? What regulations are going to put in place to ensure that these bills are being handled effectively by their local communities? And because putting a piece of legislation in at the state level will impact communities differently throughout the state of California. So, it's important to be able to have the opportunity to write on the regulations or clarify certain things in the legislation that might not have had the opportunity to be clarified or identified clearly as the bill was going through the legislative process. So, like I said, once the bill becomes law, there's still opportunities to be involved in that process. State agencies and departments will request public comment from stakeholders. Right here on the right-hand side, you can see this is an example of a notice for proposed regulations from the California Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control for a bill that was recently passed. This provides the opportunity for, again, the departments oftentimes share proposed regulations that they're going to look to implement and are willing to receive comment on that. A lot of times they give you a little, I think it's 30 to 60 days notice. Sometimes though, in terms of emergency circumstances, it can be as short as 5 days notice, 5 business days. So it's important to be on the lookout for those announcements from state departments for notices on these proposed regulations. And you can sign up for announcements and notifications from the most common departments your prevention networks are working within. So, California Department of Alcohol Beverage Control, you can get, notifications like this as these kind of opportunities emerge with other state departments as well. You have to kind of do your own due diligence to see what that process looks like, but it should be a very similar instance in terms of being able to monitor the regulation writing aspect of a bill as it begins to get implemented. So essentially those are all of the different ways in which a bill travels through the legislature, and those are all the different opportunities along the way that you can engage with the bill. So now I want to talk about some of the tools for advocacy that we possess that allow us to, at each of those stages, from the birth of a bill to the committee stages to regulation writing, ways in which you as prevention network providers, as community members, as individuals, have the opportunity to engage with pieces of legislation. So I want to talk about these tools for advocacy and kind of what those hold and encompass. On our right-hand side, this is the ACT model for change that we follow at IPS. So as you can see in the bottom left corner, a little upside down, is the policy and systems change. We see policy and systems change as a very pivotal part of helping transform our communities at the local, regional, and state level. So that is why it's so important to be involved in monitoring this process and knowing what tools are available to you. So some of the ways to engage, you can call your legislator, you can meet with your legislator, write a position letter, testify at committee meetings, or you can host or participate in media events. These are just a few, and there are many, many other ways I'm sure that exist. These are just some of the ways that which I personally had experience, Raul's had experience, as well as some of our partners have engaged in terms of trying to influence legislation or advocate on behalf of certain issues that we deal with. So I'm going to talk to you about a few of those right now and some of the experiences I've had and the ways in which we have been able to monitor that progress and kind of some of our best practices or tips and things like that. So I want to start with calling your legislator. I had the opportunity early on in my I guess I'll call my government affairs career, as I'm calling it, to intern for an assembly member. And I remember like, okay, hey, if you get a phone call about the legislation, we have a spreadsheet that you're going to track this information into, and we want to make sure that we're taking note of all those things. And I'm like, well, that's pretty interesting. Like, I didn't think, I figured that people called you and talk or share their opinions or sometimes complain about their issues and stuff that, usually it's an intern answering, and they're just kind of like listening and, and providing some confidence or instilling confidence in the constituent that your voice is being heard. But it was a legitimate, I was surprised pleasantly that it was a legitimate concern for our representatives when it came to people providing their input on different issue areas and specifically pieces of legislation that were currently in the legislature. So I would say the way that you can best prepare for calling your legislator or calling your office and wanting to leave as an individual, your input or your perspective on a bill is have notes on key points you want to make. Be prepared to speak with a staff member, and this will be something I'll reiterate a number of times. It's no insult. It's no insult if an intern is speaking with you. It's no insult if the district director is speaking with you. In rare cases, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Randy Vopel, but he's an assembly member, or was an assembly member in the San Diego County East region, and he was famous kind of for answering his own phone call. And that is an uncommon practice that a lot of assembly members, I would say, it's unique and it's rare. But be prepared to speak with a staff member and think no less of your call or your significance of your input and things like that. Because like I said, it was my job to be tracking the input and the comments of those individuals. And it was important for me to get their information. So be ready to provide your name, the city you live in or your hometown, and potentially your zip code. Because people also want to make sure that one, you're constituent or know if you're a constituent, and if you're not, who they can help direct your call to so that your voice can be properly heard and that the representative that is actually your representative can take into consideration and take action on your thoughts and opinions and stuff. So that's a good way to prepare for the call. Now, during the call, be clear, concise, and persuasive. Share why you're calling and what action you want the legislator to take. I want to say there are two major reasons people often, in my experience and from what I've done in calling a representative, they either want to voice their opinion on a piece of legislation or an issue their community is facing, or they're looking to set up a meeting and wanting to further establish a connection with the representative. So whatever it is, whatever reason you are calling for, share that out the gate. Once you've given them your information, done a short introduction, share exactly why you're calling, so someone can make quick, accurate notes and take down the information that you're sharing, and decide, and have a clear ask. Provide reasoning and logic as behind why you're asking for what you're asking for. Provide your personal perspective on an issue if you are calling about a piece of legislation or an issue your community is facing. Really make it something unique and personal to you. You don't want to sound scripted. You don't want to be kind of just following a general trend or just kind of coming off as monotone. Really, providing personal anecdotes and things like that can be really effective when it comes to sharing your take on an issue. And it has a lasting message and a lasting pull on the individual you're speaking with. And then also always thank the staff member. Always thank whoever you're speaking to. You always want to leave a positive impression in case you do have the opportunity to meet with the representative in the future or their staff. You want to develop a good rapport with those individuals and show them that you care and are interested in what they have to say, and thank them for their time. Also, after the call, have a follow-up plan. Don't let the call. I like having this mentality, not just with calling, because like I said, calling is just one way you can engage with your legislator. But of all the ways we're going to talk about engaging with your legislator, treat the call, treat the action as a catalyst, not a conclusion. It is meant to prompt further action. It's meant to develop and build a relationship. It's not meant to just be a one-off, like, oh, well, I did my civic engagement for the day. I did my due diligence. You know, I did my civic duty. I'm good for the year. Like, you know, this is a part of making this a habit in your process and making civic engagement a habit in the work that you do, in work, outside of work, and things like that. So be prepared with a follow-up email. Be prepared to continue engagement with your representative on social media, tagging your legislator and things like that. Don't let your action, whatever it might be, and calling just being an example here, be just a one-off thing. So that's calling your legislator and how you can engage with them. Another way, and like I kind of mentioned in the call, you meet with your legislator. Again, be prepared. You'll likely be meeting with a staffer, and that's okay. That's fantastic, honestly, because representatives have so much respect for the people they hire on, and because they are in such high demand, and so many people want to share their opinions, their thoughts, and their issues on things. It's difficult to meet those needs. So the staffers are the eyes and ears of the representative. So in no way should you take offense to meeting with a staffer. You should treat them with the same level of respect and have the same desire to persuade them to want to care about your issue. So when it comes to scheduling a meeting with your legislator, check the legislator's website for contact information. Right here, I had a recent meeting with Assemblymember Akila Weber's staff, and I went on and I typed in Assemblymember Weber meeting request, and this is what popped up. I filled out this form, bada bing, bada boom, sent it off, and was able to get a response back and set up that meeting. So look for those different opportunities. Don't just try, look and see if there's a specific way in which to go about contacting the representative for setting up a meeting. Don't just assume that hitting the, emailing the info contact information that they provide on the website is the most effective way. But do your due diligence in that regard. Check their website for contact information. If they don't, if they have a phone number or if they have a generic email, giving them a call and requesting, a great point of contact to schedule a meeting with shows your prompt, shows your desire to want to speak with them, shows initiative. And oftentimes they give you a staffer's direct email address who you can then develop a dialogue with. So do your due diligence when it comes to finding out contact information. Also prepare a short introduction. Always have a strong reason for a meeting. Have an ask prepared when you do your request. If there's specific legislation you want to be talking about, if there's specific issues you want to be talking about, events you want to invite them to, all of those kinds of things. Important to include that when you're trying to set up a meeting with the representative. And something I like to call polite persistence. It may take a few months to set up some of these meetings. Depending on your poll, depending on your reputation, depending on your experience with working with representatives, it might take a little while of politely following up on emails every couple of weeks, once a week, calling the office, making sure you still got the correct contact information, expressing an interest in wanting them to have at your event, all those kinds of things. Like I said, they get a heavy influx of people wanting to reach out and contact them. So do not be discouraged. It can and has taken me a couple of months sometimes to schedule and set up meetings with our representatives, but it's worth it every single time. And so my best advice is polite persistence when it comes to scheduling those meetings. Now, once you receive a response for a meeting, respond promptly, confirm the meeting time, be ready for last minute changes. Like staffers' schedules are very, I will say, volatile, and they can move and shift, and things can run over, and new and current events heavily impact, their priorities for the week and all that kind of stuff. So be ready and don't take it personally if someone asks to change the meeting time or move it to a later date or move it up or anything like that. Just get ready for those kinds of changes and prioritize that within your own organization's goals and things like that. I said expect to meet with a staffer, so just continue to keep that in mind. And now in the meeting, similar to a phone call, similar to the letter I'll be talking about after this, be concise. Outline the objective of the meeting. What can they do for you and what can you do for them? Clearly ask that. Don't need to beat around the bush when speaking with a representative. Oftentimes you've got 30 minutes in these meetings, at least in the introductory ones, when it comes to speaking with a staffer. Get to the point, be persuasive, always be kind of advocating for yourself or for your issue, establish rapport. Similar to how you would go into a job interview, do your research on your representative. What do they care about? What current legislation do they have coming through that you think aligns with your issue area? What have you been tracking and following? What current events have they been involved with? Did they recently receive an award? Congratulate them for that. Little things like that help you stand out in the minds of representatives, and also develop a healthy environment for dialogue about tough and difficult issues. Finally, identify shared interests, have a call to action, and have a reason to follow up. Ask them questions. What would you like to see more of? Would you be willing to use me as a subject matter expert as these issues come up? Are there any, do you have any events coming up that I can come out and support? Have a reason to keep the conversation going. This is a catalyst. This is not a conclusion to action. Continue to move the conversation and move the relationship along. So those are some of the key takeaways I have when it comes to meeting with your legislator. And then finally, I want to talk about writing a position letter. Through your leadership organizations, depending on your organization's requirements, your nonprofit status and things like that, you can have opportunities through California Alcohol Policy Alliance and things like that to be writing position letters on different pieces of legislation as they travel through the committees and things. Like I said, setting up meetings or sharing your interest on calls with representatives and their staffers and things like that, sending letters. These are all things that are to be done as the bill travels through the committee process. And you should be ready to be constantly adapting your arguments, changing the argument as amendments come through, pulling things out of your letters or your phone calls and things like that. Always stay open and the importance of tracking the bill can't be emphasized enough. So when you're writing a letter, know who you're writing to. Track the bill, know its author and its location. If a bill is going to the government organizational committee, this is a sample letter from the alcohol policy panel, the UDI's leadership advisory group on a letter that they had written for AB 61. And so it was important to know, where was the bill at? What committee was it going into? When was the hearing for this bill? Because you want to provide your input on these different things prior to the conversation already happening. It's not really effective to kind of share your input or share new evidence or advice as to why a bill is, positive or negative if the committee hearing's already happened and it's moving through the legislative process. So it's important to stay up to date and be tracking this legislation and know who you're writing to. Have a clear subject line. What is the bill talking about? What's the position that you're taking on the bill or the issue? What do you want to be saying in this letter? Properly introduce yourself or the organization you are writing on behalf of. Again, huge reminder, letters are highly encouraged from individuals, from the staffers that I've spoken to. Organizations can be great to kind of show a strong pull of community members behind a certain issue, but individual letters have the opportunity to really establish a clear personal connection with the issue and to the representative. So clearly identify your argument in a letter, support it. Empirical evidence for your argument, research, things like that are great for letters. Logic arguments can also be effective. And when writing on behalf of yourself, personal anecdotes can have a powerful impact. Just ensure also, see, this letter is one page long. One page is all the time in the world that a staffer has to be working on these things. So I would say keep things concise again. So just ensure that if you do use personal anecdotes or experiences, that it's not taking away from the argument and stuff like that. So finally, conclude with a clear ask. Always want the person you always want the person you are talking to have an idea of what it is that you're going to be wanting or expecting from them in terms of positions and things like that, or decisions. Have a template set for future letters and be prepared to adjust your argument again, track amendments. So that's that. We've covered a lot of information, and so we're going to take now the time to transition into talking more about how do these different tools for advocacy and things like the potential for testifying in committees and engaging in media events and things like that. What do those look like when put into action? So I'm now going to go ahead and transfer the microphone over to Raul to talk about the California Alcohol Policy Alliance and his experience with LA-DAPA and CAPA, and then we're going to kind of open it up more in a conversational style for the last part of this presentation. So Raul, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate this. As part of this particular segment, when we talk about testifying at committee meetings and hearings, typically it goes pretty much along in alignment with what you've seen thus far, which is a plan of operation, a methodology that you want to approach each opportunity with. Part of that strategic planning and development comes through what we exercise through part of what is known as the California Alcohol Policy Alliance, which has basically been around since about 2015. And its main function is to look at issues and how they impact us throughout the state. And so it's clearly designed to advocate for issues that affect us or are coming down the pike through the state legislature that will inevitably impact us throughout the entire state. Some of those objectives as part of CAPA was established early on to kind of tell people who were interested in joining what we're actually positioning ourselves around. And some of them are listed here. Largely charged for harm was a really big incentive for us, finding ways to implement some kind of excise tax if possible, to obviously allocate more money to prevention specialists and to people who are in recovery. Largely, there's currently not too much coming down the way that we can actually allocate specifically for that. So we're always looking for ways to kind of bring that issue forward as part of an objective of the Alliance. Limiting alcohol advertising, which is really critical to help people engage with alcohol, the impacts it has on youth. Obviously making ABC effective as a resource and a tool. They're a small entity with a large impact, but potential for a large impact. But how they come into contact with the issues that we're dealing with is really critical. So we've established a meeting opportunity that we have quarterly meetings set around working with ABC as well. And then eliminate products to underage youth, I should say, which largely took place early on, I think about 2008 or 9, where they started to introduce these kind of flavored beverages. And Alcohol Justice worked on a campaign to minimize or actually take away the influx of these drinks that were coming in with caffeine added to alcohol. And that kind of prompted this whole idea with what's the next phase of this particular kind of marketing component of the alcohol industry, and who will it impact the most, and how will it impact or adversely impact youth in our society. So that became part of also a platform of CAPA. And these guiding principles basically help us to kind of more or less tailor our whatever legislation we're looking at through CAPA, tailor it specifically to see if it falls within this criteria. And we usually, when we meet, we start to break down the legislation that is most directed towards alcohol, and then obviously the greatest impact each and every one of these potential bills might have. Next slide, please. And that's part of the process of establishing priority objectives. And what we do is basically when we meet at this time, we meet bi-monthly. We host meetings that start to break down these issues for our members. And part of our concern about this approach is that when at first we thought about bringing only the issues that we thought were most critical to the membership forward and just having them kind of be part of the process in terms of implementing a strategy around stopping them. But we realized that to increase engagement, to make sure that everyone who's at our meetings has the capacity to weigh in on an issue or an idea, in establishing a new approach enabled us to provide a list of potential bills that will be obviously impacting us along the way, but which ones are most critical. Having those priority objectives enables people to be part of the process, kind of refines the method by which we come to a consensus about what to approach. Then we start to initiate steps towards implementing a process to either regulate, oppose, or somehow modify those potential bills as they're coming down the pike. So it really starts to help us move forward in the ways in which we can plan and incorporate all of our members in the process of dealing with these potential bills. Next slide, please. And this is how we went. Part of our process and understanding is kind of like where I started to come into play with all this is that, working in Los Angeles, part of our incentive was to organize around grassroots organizations and individuals to help address some of the issues adversely impacting community at the local level. Through this effort, a lot of things were accomplished over the course of time with LADAPA, but once it originated first as the, I think, Los Angeles ban on alcohol ads, I believe, or the Coalition to Ban Alcohol Ads, excuse me. And what that enabled us to do back then was to create a ordinance to ban alcohol ads on city bus benches in Los Angeles in 2011. It also enabled us then to move forward to initiate an ordinance to ban alcohol ads on LA city-owned and controlled property, which is in 2015. And that really started to lay the groundwork for what LADAPA would eventually become. And it was then at that point when we decided to take more active steps in understanding how we can start to address some of the issues that are coming down the pike from the state. And that's when CAPA started to kind of take shape and take form in people's minds about how we can actually initiate this at a statewide level. Once it was initiated, LADAPA, which I was largely a part of at that time, worked with CAPA to pass a resolution within Los Angeles to oppose SB 58, which was the essential rollout of the 4AM bar bill. And that kind of connection between Los Angeles and the state really enabled us to look at where these impacts will have the greatest effect on the turnout of a potential bill coming in from the state. And I'm sorry, you can move to the next slide if you'd like to. Essentially, within that formation of the grassroots concept is obviously engaging with what I would consider, I say obviously because it's been a long time since I've been working with them, are organizational entities as well as community members, because we want to leverage resources. And leveraging resources enables us to have broader outreach and also brings a different level of support within the conversation sphere that we have around these kind of issues. And so when we intersected with CAPA, and we have done so for many years since 2015, we recently worked with them to bring again another oppositional effort against the 4AM bar bill, which in turn enabled us to involve ourselves with the LA County Democratic Party, which is a really big entity, which kind of solidified the reasons why we could actually enact an LA City resolution, which was supported by our then council member, Paul Koretz, who actually initiated it through city council and got the city council members probably about I'd say a 10, maybe a 10-2 vote in favor of, which in turn laid some of the groundwork for these other neighboring cities by which this 4AM bar bill was going to impact to start, I guess, start to take form and take shape and take a look at what this could potentially mean. Los Angeles itself is a very large city. It often impacts a lot of legislation and legislative concerns around the state. And if we could take the lead in doing something like this and initiating something like this, we might start to lay the groundwork for other cities to follow suit. We took our efforts to Fresno. We reached out to Coachella and Cathedral City, and sooner than later, they started to kind of just fall into place, almost like in a domino effect. Fresno was the first major city that we reached out to get support. And we actually took an initiative to go down there to meet with people, or go up there, I should say, because I'm from LA. Go up there. Many of our folks came, like, kind of, I guess, went laterally to Fresno, or went down to Fresno, I should say, and laterally to Sacramento. But nevertheless, we went there and kind of came together as a group to kind of carry the message of concern for this and how it might impact Fresno as a whole. So luckily, we were able to convince them of the impending harm it could possibly provide for their community. They're a different city. They operate differently than LA or West Hollywood, where a lot of advocates were in favor of this bill. And so we're able to actually bring them the evidence, bring them the information forward that they needed to make a decision. And they made a decision that aligned with our effort to stop the 4AM bar bill. And much to what Matthew was talking about in terms of, Maxwell, I'm sorry, what Maxwell was talking about was preparation. Any of these initiatives that we've taken forward in these committee hearings have been, or legislative meetings, have been in the effort of bringing information together in a planned and concise manner by which we can occupy their time for which we have it with information that will hopefully be persuasive. We tend to formulate these meetings based around input from all participants available, And we like to offer different perspectives from each individual and what they can bring to the table of discussion that will kind of be more persuasive in those closed meeting hearings. So that's part of the incentive. Part of the incentive for why we like to work with local groups and also interconnect with agencies from and coalitions from Los Angeles and or the state level and that to state. And then we were able to reduce that particular 4A bill in 2022 to a 3-year pilot program, which was something that was not going to be largely received well by the people who initiated the bill, but was part of the process by which we could start to change the outcome for which we wanted to stop the bill. Eventually, the bill was stopped. It didn't pass, but it took that concerted effort amongst many organizations within CAPA and local alliances like the one that I'm part of, Los Angeles Drug and Alcohol Policy Alliance, to coordinate those efforts to make that, to stop that bill and have that opposition be successful. So.
Shannon,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, I feel like you covered this 4A barbell perfectly. So I think that was kind of the big hole. Was there anything else you want to add on that one?
No, this is just an image of the LA City resolution effort where we coordinated with CAPA at the city level. They came down from up north and met with us to coordinate this event. Amongst our members, we brought people out from the community as spokespeople to represent the people the people who will be largely impacted by this bill, because we took the bill to the local level. We took it away from the idea of an economic impact and what it might bring to these local businesses, but then talked about the splash effect and what that might have on local citizens and community members who drive and move throughout the city and the impacts it might pose to them. And by creating that association, that distinction between how they can be a part of the process and largely impacted by the process, they're able to come forward and start to see the connections to how these bills impact them directly. So it's really critical to bring that issue forward in ways in which we can engage community at the means by which we can meet them at, where they will intersect with an issue is really critical.
Absolutely. Raul, thanks so much for helping put, a face and action to the kind of things that we're talking about when it comes to tools for advocacy and what that actually looks like when we're talking about specific legislation and the experiences that you have had with LADAPA and I've had with, IPS and UBI, and we both had with CAPA as a whole. And so what I want this to do now, this kind of our concluding part before we get into the question and answer portion of this capacity building workshop, is talking about building partnerships between statewide and local coalitions. And Raul and I are kind of just going to go back and forth and chat a little bit about what our experiences have been with CAPA and how it's impacted our perspective on the statewide for advocacy to really grow and thrive at the state level, and also the kind of insight we're able to provide to a statewide alliance to the issues that we face at the local level. So I'll just share kind of openly the challenges faced at the local and state level. One of the biggest challenges I feel like that we face at the local level has been it's just a smaller network in general. Like you're very close to it, and so it's really beneficial when it comes to being able to engage with community members and people. I feel like it's easier to get people invested and involved in an issue when they can see it firsthand like that. But when it comes to state level issues, it's a little harder to kind of show them what kind of an impact, you have to take them really far out wide to say, hey, this is what's going to happen at the state level, and then bring it back into the local level. And sometimes that connection is harder to make when you don't have the backing of a statewide alliance to reconfirm, like, hey, yeah, like, no, we have the study or we have the research that will show this will affect these different regions and provide this impact. And so I think one of the challenges at the local opportunity when you don't have the engagement of a statewide alliance and some of the things that we just kind of face in general is it's harder to kind of take people's perspective beyond just what's immediately happening at the county or even in their different cities, and show that, yeah, hey, even at the state level, this will come back and affect your day life. It might not be tomorrow, it might be next month, but within this next year, you're going to see some very distinct changes going on in your community, even though it's not something that you got to see firsthand at your local city council meeting. So that's one of the big things I feel like I see at the local level as a challenge. What about you, Raul?
Yeah, much in the similar way. When working with LADAPA as a local coalition, we've also been challenged by resources. And ways in which we try to leverage that is obviously working with, excuse me for saying that, it's not obvious, but in our assessment, I should say, that working with organizations is really instrumental to success in what we try to do, because it kind of leverages resources to an extent. It doesn't necessarily pull resources from people or their agencies in a direct or a monetary way. What it does is actually kind of leverages their ability to support, to be a part of the process. By bringing their information, their ideas forward, we can start to collaborate on best practices or steps we want to take as a methodology to looking at local issues as well as encompassing the larger, broader state issues. And I think in that experience, we've also been able to educate ourselves, learn from people's perspectives, learn from their different, from their vantage points of experience. And so it brings a sense of like unity in terms of how we work in a cohesive way towards finding a resolution or a solution forward. There are some limited policy perspectives, only in that it's limited by our own personal experience and the extent by which we want to become involved. And so through our local alliance, we have decided to now take policy positions through state legislature, because in part, many of our members are part of CAPA as well. And so their concerns are starting to look at the bigger picture, which is how do we start to address these things that we see affecting us in our daily lives at the level by which we try to be and institute some kind of prevention, some kind of change or systemic change in the process. So there's a certain way in which we look at things from a politicizing sort of growth, you could say, within the alliance and our membership to understand these issues and understand the nuanced pathways by which Maxwell brought forward in terms of how bills are initiated, the channels by which they move, and how we can be a part of the process at the state level to lay some kind of groundwork for stopping it, opposing it, regulating it, whatever we can do to make it more tolerable for us to either have in existence for ourselves within our lives or stop it altogether if we can. Part of that exercise has come through what we've done at the local level, and we meet with our own representatives at the city level. We also go in with the same idea in terms of having a plan, really talking through who's going to say what, when, and where in terms of their experience and where they come from, as well as understanding that this is only part of the process. Much of the conversations we have is just a part of almost like a mechanized system that works towards the kind of change we want to actually see, or the kind of recommendations or any way we can alter the outcome of something. It's very rare that we can actually stop something in its tracks at the local level, but we can modify it. And so it requires a building of networks through City Hall, much to what Maxwell was saying. When you have these somewhat like allyships between department agencies, if not representatives. For us, we work with the Department of City Planning. It's very big in terms of how we, work with understanding issues, ways in which it can maybe make recommendations towards changing or maybe tailoring a particular kind of potential motion that is seeking to become an ordinance. These are processes that we learn to develop along the way with actual policy actions that take us into like conferences or any kind of like march or demonstration. Oftentimes in my experience, it's been that, growing into this as I have is this understanding that by hosting a march or demonstration, you're going to have an impact. Well, what we've kind of understand, and part of the whole process they're working with an alliance is understanding that this is only part of the process to an end. It isn't the all, it isn't the end. And many of the times when I was in those marches, it was like, well, what's going to happen now? We didn't understand there was a process, that this is a tactic by which which organizing, lends itself to initiate through its campaign, but it only comes as a result of a tool, or so we look at it as a tool to meet an end. And many times in the way we organize, we come up with this preconception that that's the only way to really demonstrate or be organized. And that's really not part of it. And that's not the entirety of it, I should say. So we learned to use this as a tool, a means by which we can start to persuade, maybe impact local representatives. We really try to involve the press, and we look at it as a strategic opportunity versus an all-in, this is where the road ends kind of initiative, as it might have been in the early days of organizing. So as part of this legislative process, this whole legislative process becomes really the core by which we start to think about change and the tools that we like to access and utilize most in the work that we do.
Well, Raul, I think you hit just the really kind of key aspects of this. This is something, this is just it's constantly ongoing, and the progress that we do make, that should be the focus. It's clear and easy to come sometimes, especially in the work that we do when it comes to alcohol policy, be so focused on the outcome. And then a lot of times, we don't get good bills. We get a lot of bills that kind of come through and don't help us out, or don't, meet the needs of the communities that we're representing and serving. But it's really focused on this idea of we're continuing to and constantly making progress towards addressing these issues and shifting when you're shifting social norms and shifting the focus of an entire conversation around an industry as big and dominant as alcohol, for instance, is no small task. And that's where I think one of the huge benefits I see from our partnerships with CAPA, for instance, is the idea that it takes a village, and sometimes multiple villages, and then it takes an alliance that connects all those multiple villages all towards one kind of circular goal. And each kind of, in each local municipality, each regional coalition, each local prevention provider has an agenda, and has what they want to achieve, and has the impact they want to see within their own communities. And I think that one of the biggest benefits that I've had from being a part of CAPA is this idea of being able to use San Diego County as a case study at the local level of what can happen, both positive and negative, when certain policies are enacted, or when certain action is or is not taken, and being able to use that as our own personal anecdote when CAPA organizes these meetings with our legislators, or has policy committees testifying, and they're being able to pull experiences from those in Sacramento, Los Angeles, San Diego, Fresno, and all over, because while each individual experience is different, each one has its own individual value that it's contributing to the overall cause itself. So just wanted to be conscious of time so we can turn over to the Q&A portion of this. Raul, I just want to ask, what do you think is, if you were to give one piece of advice to a prevention provider in alcohol and other drugs, or in another advocacy realm, what would you say if they were looking to get involved with their statewide coalition? What piece of advice would you give them for them to be able to get the most out of their partnership with their state coalition?
Well, I would probably, suggest, as a coalition, that you decide, the level by which you want to integrate your effort into the statewide effort first, analyze that, and then elect a person or two people to be the representatives of your coalition in that statewide alliance. And by that, they in turn take on the responsibility of being where they need to be for those particular meetings to bring that information back to the coalition. It's very important to have people there. It doesn't require that everyone be there. And in this virtual space that we tend to live in nowadays, it often feels like because we're virtual, we can be there, or we should be there. But what we're realizing is that though it's a great tool, it's a great asset, sometimes by all in being there, we're taking ourselves away from the process of getting the work that we'd like to get done. So if you can allocate a particular person or two people to be a part of those meetings as representatives of a coalition, they can speak in part for the coalition where they need to, and then be able to leverage the resources they can provide to the alliance based upon what they know from the coalition. It's always great to be part of the process. It's never that you can do too little. It's that you're engaged and you're involved, and you in your capacity as a coalition can always find ways to be very instrumental towards the end process. And what I'm learning more and more as we work within the state, as we work throughout the nation, is that, having an alliance of any sort, an allegiance to something, is really critical. And the ways in which you can contribute don't have to be by the ways in which others seemingly think they do, by some monetary way or some very huge, large entity offering whatever they can bring to the table. It's more about your continued support in the ways in which you can leverage your own personal resources, but that you engage in a committed effort to be part of the process to its very end. Because like Maxwell illustrated, there are always ways to integrate along the process. Obviously, stopping any bill that you're concerned about is always critical, but there are ways in which you can be part of the process even beyond its passage. So never think of your efforts as being without good cause, but never think that your contributions are minimal in comparison to others. Do what you can within yourself or within your coalition to provide as much as you can with the resources that you have.
Fantastic, Raul. I think that's a wonderful conclusion to everything we've been able to talk about today, and talking about the importance of these relationships, understanding the limitations felt both at the local and the state level, understanding the value and the importance of these partnerships, and looking at the lasting impact that they continue to have even beyond, even beyond the end of a legislative session and things like that. So now, thank you all. I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to sit with Raul and myself today and learn a little bit about our legislative process, and figure out how you can take the best advantage of the tools that are at your availability, and see what kind of resources are out there for you. We want to turn over to Q&A now. So Craig, I'll hand this off to you. We've got a little over 10 minutes to do some Q&A. So if any questions are coming in, we are happy to answer.
Yeah, there's already a couple already, Maxwell. Let's see. First one is we are seeing more and more corporate and special interests submitting similar bill language to different legislatures. Is there any restrictions on how language for a bill can be submitted to Legislative Council?
So that's a really great question, and I will check. I will look and see that. I know that there are certain conditions when it comes to specific like speech language, but I don't know in terms of argument bases or other kind of ways in which if there's been decisions on language that can be seen as misinterpreting or misleading and things like that. I think that we've seen some various social issues coming up following the COVID age that have brought up the ideas of, okay, what's clear and concise information? What can how do I clearly understand this issue? Is this, is what's being said the truth? How can I be, confident in that? So I will follow that up and share that out with everyone and see if what limitations might be with the Legislative Council's office, and see if there's any guidance on that.
Excellent. Our next question, this might be one for Raul perhaps. Would you speak on the effectiveness of a cultural shift in leading or influencing policies, but also policies in leading or influencing a cultural shift?
Well, cultural, I mean, it's kind of a broad term, but the way I look at that is it's maybe the thought process behind the way things traditionally have kind of operated in the past to where they might be moving towards in the future. And by that I mean, like within the COVID situation, we saw somewhat of a cultural shift within the organizing field. At least I noticed it, which was this idea that the culture being oftentimes that we were siloed in the work that we did. And COVID kind of reminded us that we're all affected. We can all be subject to something beyond even the scope of our own powers. And it reminded us that, working together towards resolution of some sort is probably our best tool that we have as preventionists, as organizations doing this kind of work. Changing the culture by which we stop preventing ourselves from moving forward in a cohesive and collective way, and finding ways in which we can integrate the efforts. And part of that came through one of our summits for CAPA back, I believe, at 2020, which was to start to look at ways in which some of the concerns that we have start to intersect with the other interests that organizations have within their own work that they do. So for instance, if it's like domestic violence, if it's trauma, it's finding those connecting pathways and intersections by which we can support one another and weigh in. If that particular field of interest that particular organization is centering their attentions around, their efforts around, is there legislation pending that they're trying to maybe move forward? Are there bills that they're trying to enact? Are they looking for ways to have an impact on the outcomes by which they find their community or the people they're trying to serve impacted by? And by noticing and extending ourselves forward and outward into those directions brings about a fundamental kind of change in the way that we operate. So it's not cultural to the extent by which I think about in terms of like class, in terms of ethnicity and so forth, but culture in terms of the way we work within this industry and amongst ourselves.
Thank you, Raul. Another question that came up. Let's see. I'll skip one here. A person is looking for resources that help explain all this to the lay person, so the people out in the community who may not have a lot of knowledge about the legislative process. Do you have any recommendations?
I would say yes, I do. I think that this process to the layperson to the expert is exceedingly complicated. So I think that's important to kind of keep in mind. I don't think that I think it gets a little easier to digest the more as we expose ourselves to the language, the process, and then doing and conducting that research. I would say that there's a lot, the state Senate and the state assembly themselves, I think, do a pretty good job of providing infographics that show the bill process through its entirety and show, and there's no way to get around how complex that process is. And there will always be there's always exceptions to the rules and things like that that just become more known as you are around the legislative process more and more. But I will say the assembly has that infographic that I showed earlier. I can share out after this with the participants who registered from the state assembly that kind of shows the bill process. Also, I found that the California State Senate has a really great resource on their website that walks you through like a 5-6 step of what a bill does in terms of like going through the legislative process in a way that I think is simple and straightforward enough that it also highlights the different aspects in ways you can engage with the legislation throughout the process. Politico had another really great overview of the California legislative process. So there are a number of different ways. I don't know if there's one that is particularly perfect or ideal. I would say that the ones that I think are most effective really kind of help you identify the key components and the parts of the legislative process where you can be engaged. You don't need to understand every nook and cranny and every amendment or exception or vote that can be passed to alter the course of the bill. Understanding the aspects and the points in a bill's process where you have the opportunity to engage and share your input is probably the most effective resource to find. So I will be sure to share a couple of resources I found helpful in my own experience out with the participants. But I definitely think going to the Assembly and the Senate websites is a great place to start.
Excellent. And then one for Raul. You kind of mentioned how you were kind of how bills you were trying to stop. Can you talk about any policies or bills that you might be working on, either supporting or getting sponsored this year?
It would have to be at the local level because the state analysis hasn't really come out yet. We haven't formulated that entirely. We've actually found those that we want to oppose at the state level, but at the local level, we're initiating one of our own, which is we refer to as a neighborhood empowerment tool. And it's basically designed to limit alcohol business type licenses from expanding within a certain area by setting like a moratorium around a neighborhood. It could be as large as a block, it could be a mile wide. It really depends upon the nature of the area by which we're trying to implement this, but it's something we're trying to put some framework around and ways in which we can start to bring this forward through the city. What it's basically going to try to do is actually bring community empowerment forward by enabling people to speak on behalf of their own neighborhood or their own community to address the overall impact density and oversaturation has played so far in their communities, with just the expansion of like off sale entities like liquor stores and things of that nature. If it's already an area that's heavily populated or densely populated, I should say, this kind of potential legislation, or it could be potential legislation, would help to minimize that type of license type from coming back into a community. So it would be completely regulated by the community and their local representative to like predetermine for themselves what type of business they want to allow into that particular region. And then ergo minimizing certain ones from coming in that will just continuously add to the density issue that they're already facing. So we're putting that framework together and the language for that, and basically breaking down like next steps. It's an integrated process that takes a long time. And one thing to understand, I think that we haven't really expressed, that I think is really great to kind of bring forward, is that there are different ways to look at legislation and how we impact and how we initiate and what we expect to come from it. When we're initiating stuff in the experiences that we've had, these are lengthy processes, anywhere from 2, 3 to 5 years. And it's because it goes through that kind of developmental phase of all these different components and entities being involved along the way. When we're stopping a bill at the state, we only have a small window of time to do that. So there's a different level of action in terms of an intensity by which you can start to engage with the issue. But at the local level, within your local community, social host ordinances, anything of that nature takes a period of time to initiate and to enact. And so give yourselves that kind of opportunity to at least like plan and prepare for that length of time that it's going to take. But conversely, I would say that, if you haven't yet formulated on any kind of what I would consider proactive legislation, things that you will try to initiate yourselves as a coalition, just look for the issues that you think impact your entity, your coalition the most, and where you might begin to lay an impact, and understand that whatever you do, it's going to be a first step in this process. So you don't have to know everything right out the gate. You'll uncover these things as you go along, and then look for opportunities, to engage in trainings. We've provided trainings through Alcohol Justice to local coalitions on this kind of work. I'm sure IPS has a component of that potential avenue. So there's always ways to get yourselves familiar with the process, but give yourselves time to acclimate to it and to learn it.
And just to clarify, Raul, you said at the local level, this moratorium, you're working on that at the city of LA level, right?
That's correct. Yeah, we want to try to get it implemented as a pilot program first, but it would be at the local level within LA.
Okay, excellent. And we just have time for one more question, it looks like, which was, will the slides be shared with us? Is the question.
Yes. I will plan to be sending up a follow-up email to those who registered today with the slides and some other really helpful pieces of information that were similar to kind of resources that were shared. I've got 1 minute, and all I'm going to do with this 1 minute is show you this website, because this website is the thing that has saved me through my entire time of monitoring and tracking legislation. It's entirely free. It's the California Legislative Information website. There is the link right up there. Leginfo, legislature.ca.gov. This is the first thing that comes up. This is the homepage. If you're looking for a bill number, and in fact, I would recommend clicking on the bill information tab. If you're looking for a bill, if you're looking for bills with keywords, we'll just type in the word alcohol. These are the bills that have been presented so far for this year that have mentioned just the word alcohol in them. Okay. If you are interested in tracking a piece of legislation or find a piece of legislation interesting and want to track it, you can click right here. You'll see track bill right there. You'll log in. You create a little login on this website. Log in. You can literally select all notification points, and you can follow this bill its entire way through the legislature. And you say add notifications, bam, I will receive updated emails and everything like that now on this bill throughout its legislative life and things like that. So I will send out a follow-up email with some of this information along with myself and Raul's contact information. But with that, thank you all so much. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy weeks to come and learn a little bit about the legislative process for myself and Raul. We really appreciate your questions and your engagement. And if there is anything else that we can provide and further information, please do not hesitate to ask. This is a constant, constant work that we're doing. We continue to be a part of this process, and we will continue to be a part of it for quite some time. So if we can express or receive any interest in that, we will be sure to take advantage of that time you have with us. We'll also be sending out a survey for you to fill out about the presentation, so that we can get your feedback and make this even better in the future. So thank you all so much. And we really appreciate your time today. And so have a great rest of your week and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.